What does Brazil think about Venezuela, China and the United States? We'll ask the Brazilian ambassador to the United States, Sergio Amaral. Hello, I'm Anand Naidu and this is The Heat. After 2 years of recession, the Brazilian economy is starting to recover, but the political crisis has no end in sight. Many high-profile politicians are being investigated for corruption, including President Michel Temer, whose approval rating has sunk to just 3%. Brazil is the 5th largest country in the world, a key player in South America, and part of the BRICs group, the group of emerging national economies. I recently sat down with Ambassador Sergio Amaral at his official residence in Washington and began by asking him about his country's relations with the United States and its president, Donald Trump.
I think that contrary to some expectations, there are many opportunities. And Brazil is not part of the problem. That is to say, the issues that President Trump raised during the campaign, issues of trade, issues of immigration, issues of perhaps drug trafficking. I would say that on the contrary, Brazil is part of the solution because we don't run a deficit or we don't run a surplus with the United States. On the contrary, we run a deficit in the last decade, all years except for one. Second, we have a number of immigrants here in the United States, around 800,000 people, but this is an orderly community, and the number of undocumented Brazilians is quite small, and we are not a target for the agencies that deal with immigration. And also, we are not part of the problem with respect to investments. We are not taking investments out of the United States in detriment of US jobs. On the contrary, we are investing in the country. We have invested more than $30 billion here in recent years, and we have created 100,000 jobs. And there are many opportunities, and some of these opportunities come from the fact that Brazil and the US converge on many and some essential values like democracy, like human rights, like market-oriented economy, and we have many areas in which we coincide for projects in the area of trade, in the area of energy, in the area of defense, for instance, just to mention a few.
What are Brazil's foreign policy priorities?
I think the main priority of Brazil foreign policy, and it shouldn't be otherwise, is our region. And there are many possibilities in South America now that we are negotiating Mercosur, which we are part of, with the Alliance for the Pacific, to converge and to create an economic space which has similar rules, which is open, and which represents, if you take the 4 Alliance for the Pacific countries, Mexico, Peru, Colombia, Chile, and the Mercosur, Brazil, Argentina, Paraguay, Uruguay, we represent 80% of GDP of South America and 77% of the population. So I would say that our main priority is our region.
I want to get to Mercosur in a moment, but let's just stay with the United States. You suffered something of a foreign policy setback, an economic setback, I would say, back in June when the US banned beef exports or beef imports from Brazil. Has that been resolved?
There were some problems with Brazilian export of beef, but these are limited to not processed beef. The processed beef continues normally, and it represents 95% of our exports. These have not been affected. The 0.5% or the 0.5% of our exports to the United States in non-processed beef. They are still under discussion. We are going to respond. We have already done some good responses as to the conditions in Brazil for the production of beef, and we expect this to be solved pretty soon.
Let's talk about Mercosur. Let's talk about your relationship with Argentina. You're two major countries in South America. What is that relationship like?
The relation, I would say, now is very good, because the problem in Mercosur is that sometimes Brazil went in one direction, Argentina went the opposite direction. Now both countries converge. They converge in trade, they converge in opening up the economy, they converge on negotiating with the Alliance for the Pacific. So I think that Argentina and Brazil now play an active role in South America, and I think we are in the right direction.
What about your relationship with Venezuela? Here's a country that's going through enormous social unrest, economic unrest right now. Yeah. There's a major shortage of staples. The United States has not ruled out the use of force in Venezuela.
Yeah.
What can Brazil do?
We are very much concerned about Venezuela. This is a neighbor, an important neighbor. Venezuelans have always been close friends of Brazil. We have a border which is big, and we have immigration from Venezuela coming to Brazil. We have almost 10,000 Venezuelans in Brazil. Of course, we would like to contribute as far as we can to the political normalization of the situation in Venezuela, to a peaceful solution. And above all, we are concerned about humanitarian problems in Venezuela. And we are prepared to help Venezuela either in the OAS, either in bilateral relations, or in the context of efforts by some groups like the Lima Group to help finding out a peaceful solution.
Now, President Temer had a meeting with President Trump as well as other Latin American leaders on the sidelines of the United Nations General Assembly, specifically discussing the situation in Venezuela.
Yes.
What was achieved?
What is interesting is that there was, and I was present to this dinner, there was a considerable convergence in diagnosis and in the therapy. In diagnosis that we cannot accept, as we have already said in the context of Mercosur, the violation of democracy, the violation of human rights. We think that pressure on the government should pursue if needed. Of course, we would have preferred to help Venezuela to promote negotiations with the opposition, the government and opposition, to discuss how they can accommodate normalization of the political process in Venezuela. We also converge that the OAS should play a central role in the discussion on what to do vis-à-vis Venezuela. And we also converged on the need to keep it all open so that we can help, if the Venezuelan government and the opposition so wish, to help a dialogue and some kind of mediation if they request it.
Now, you talk about putting pressure on Venezuela. Is it just restricted to putting pressure, or are there other initiatives that you are?
I think that each country should do what it deems to be more appropriate to do. Of course, the US has done some focused, localized, individualized sanctions. This may help. We have done other kinds of pressures, and we'll continue to have or to make an effort to help a peaceful solution to the country.
Let's look at some of the other policies that the United States has adopted, which will definitely affect Brazil. Things like the Paris Accord. The United States has pulled out of that accord. You, of course, are home to the Amazon River, play a very important role in the Earth's climate and what happens here. How much of a setback is that for Brazil, the fact that the United States pulled out?
Of course, we regretted it because we are very much committed. But we are open to continue our bilateral cooperation in the area of the environment. And I think that perhaps even if the United States does not come back. We would prefer the United States to come back to the treaty. There are many areas in which you can work together in favor of the environment and to fight climate change.
And Brazil continues unilaterally to implement those provisions that it agreed to in the accord.
Brazil is totally committed to the Treaty of Paris.
Now, one of the other major blocs that Brazil belongs to is, of course, the BRICS group of countries. This is Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa. China, of course, is the leading member of that group. Yet, if you look at the figures, I'm wondering what membership of BRICS has done for Brazil, because there's not much intra-bloc trading between Brazil and the other countries. There's a lot of trade, of course. It's increasing trade between Brazil and China.
Yeah. There's a big trade between Brazil and China. There's a growing trade between Brazil and India. But BRICS is not trade alone, because trade is important, investments are important, the relationship among the business communities are important, and they are going ahead. There are many projects in this direction. But the BRICS have also a political content. And the political content is the fact that they were supposed to be medium-sized economies and medium-sized regional political powers in the case of China. And even in the case of India, of course, the size of the economy is much larger. There is a gap between India and China on one side and South Africa and Brazil on the other hand. But there's a political content, which is the fact that these are countries that would aspire to have a larger say in the big decision-making tables. And this has been done. I think we got some results of the IMF. And there are other areas in which these emerging countries, as they are called, can play a more positive and significant role in world affairs.
You've just had the BRICS summit in China. There was talk there, of course, of the political coordination that you're talking about. Could that extend to foreign policy coordination among the 5 countries? I
don't know. I don't know whether this has been discussed among the BRICS countries, not as far as I know. But there are areas in which they certainly can cooperate. But the interests are not the same. These are different countries from different regions with different foreign policy platforms. Sometimes they may converge, other times they cannot.
More of our interview with the ambassador right after a quick break. Stay with us, you're watching The Heat.